next speaker is Professor Nick Baker. I'll hand over to Tom to do the introduction there while I set up the slides. Thank you.
So, Angela, can I just say that was absolutely excellent. Really enjoyed it, and certainly a lot of food for thought. So, yeah, you've certainly done the job of the speaker. Our third speaker in this morning's session, as I said, hopefully you've seen that there's a different aspect to the topic here. So, as I said, so Nick, as I said, is a colleague and a friend, and we've collaborated. And if you want to get well cited, just put the word generative AI in your title. We've had the most successful by far. We broke over 100 citations 2 weeks ago, so I've never had a paper like that. So every paper from here on in will all have the word, even if it's not about generative AI, it'll have generative AI in the title. But as I said, long experience practitioner in the Office of Open Learning in the University of Windsor there. It's about sort of supporting colleagues, pushing the agenda. And I think, certainly with Nick there, it's not someone who's afraid of it, but embraces it, but also acknowledges all of the issues there. As I said, I know he loves me mentioning that he's one of the top 30 influencers here, which I got great mileage out of. So, listen, without any further ado, I'll just hand over to Nick, and I said hopefully by the time he's finished, we'll have sort of squared the circle from Tomasz to Angela, back to Nick, about looking at GenAI from a range of perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so my colleagues have touched on some of the things that I will touch on as well, bring a slightly different perspective to those. And all the slides and everything will be available to you, so we'll kind of kick off. I wanted to start with this idea of what's possible now. So we're not talking about some imagined future, we're talking about what's possible right at this moment with AI. We're in an ecosystem of apps and things that are available at the moment. All of these little dots are some kind of tool that you can use at the moment. They're all startups. They're all somehow associated with one of the big ones. And within a year or so, probably most of those will disappear. They'll be consumed by something else, or they'll have moved on to something else. But it is an ecosystem of apps that are capable of doing lots of different things. They're also becoming ubiquitous. So the challenge that we will face is, at the moment, we're thinking about this activity as I'm putting a prompt in and I'm getting a response from that. But the reality is that as these things become more and more built into every piece of technology that we have, that distinction fades out. There will still be some of that activity for sure, but they'll be in specialized tools for the thing that we need them to do. And that poses a significant challenge for acknowledgement. So when did I use it and when didn't I use it? The other thing that we think about and have been obsessed with for the last couple of years is, are the tools smarter than humans? Is my laptop smarter than me? And for the most part, we've designed ways of trying to understand that, and we've been thinking about this for a long time. AI, for most human things, now exceeds the performance of humans on intellectual tasks. There are a few things that we know that they've had trouble with. Math is one of those. But for things like language understanding, writing language, reading comprehension, image classification, these tools are better than us at most things. The other thing we've been obsessed with is, can they beat the exam structures that we have? And all of the licensing exams for most of the professions in the world, as Thomas pointed out, they can pass those exams. What's interesting though is, so the medical field, I do a lot of work with nurses, and they've been terrified about this for a while. Doctors particularly, if you look at the licensing exams all around the world, there is some cultural difference, but since we hit GPT-4, they can pass all of those exams and would get themselves licensed in almost every discipline. They also outperform physicians in most diagnostic areas now. Makes sense, the computer is good at looking at huge amounts of data and looking for subtle changes in them. What's really interesting though, is that we're seeing AI-generated physicians consistently being rated as more empathetic than humans, than human healthcare professionals. And it's across a whole series of healthcare professions. So all of these things that we thought were only things that humans can do are not necessarily human only anymore. Has anyone heard of the game Go? It's an ancient Asian game. It's been around for a couple of thousand years, 2,500 years, and there are lots of people who play it professionally. It's more complex than, certainly in terms of combinations, it's more complex than chess. And this person, Lisa Dahl, was challenged in 2016 to play against an AI tool called AlphaGo. It was built specifically to play Go by Google. Lisa Dahl went, that's crazy. Of course, this will be fun. I will kill the computer. I'm going to smash this computer. He had the thought that he could lose didn't even cross his mind. And he was the world champion at the time and had been for quite some time. So they played a 5-game series and Lee lost 4 out of the 5 matches. And at the end of that, he decided he would retire. And the way he described it was that he faced his AI demons early on. He was faced with the reality that he couldn't beat the machine. The machine was smarter than him. But what he also talks about is that the reason that he lost, in his mind, was that the tool used moves that humans had never seen before, that it was capable of creating these really creative strategies that they hadn't seen. So, fast forward, the 2016 point, when Lisa Dahl gets beaten, there are now AI Go tools that are designed to train Go players. And this is one of these weird sports where they have almost 100 years of really good data on every game that was ever played professionally, all the moves that were made. And so humans have been consistently around about the same up until 2016. Then 2016 hits, and now human players are training against AI, and we're seeing that kind of 2 sigma problem being solved by them. They're getting 2 standard deviations better than they were before.
Thanks.
Terry Tao, fellow Australian, works at UCLA, math ultra genius. This guy started university at the age of 9, got his second master's degree at the age of 16, had a PhD. He's a Fields medalist, so if you're not in the field, Fields medals like the Nobel Prize for math, and obviously quite a selective guy. He was given early access to ChatGPT's latest models a year ago and started playing with them. And he said, "This is junk, can't do math. There's no problem here. My job's secure, basically." And then GPT-O comes out, and he starts playing with that, and he says, "Actually, this is a huge improvement." And just recently, he published a thing where he said the current model, which is designed to be able to slow down and think differently and work in a more iterative way and is designed to solve math problems, that tool is actually somewhere close to a mediocre, but not entirely incompetent grad student in his department. So that means a genius anywhere else. And his opinion was that within a year, they will be at the same level as him. But we still hear this, but it can't do math, can it? Well, guess what? Google DeepMind has been working on lots of different models. One of them is AI proof model. And this year it competed in the World Math Olympiad and it won a silver medal. So now competition level math is also in the realm of GPTs. The other thing that I wanted to point to is that often the pushback that we get, or the way that people think about this is, but yeah, my niche, my little piece of the academic world, there's no way a robot could ever get to that. There's no way it'll ever perform as well as a human will. And the way we have to think of it is that, these models don't care whether you believe in them or not. They don't care whether you think they're smart or not. They don't care whether you think that they represent actual intelligence or not. AlphaGo is going to crush you at playing Go. That's what it's going to do. O1 doesn't care if you think it can do math creatively or not. And if you look at some of the stuff that Terry Tower talks about, he goes through the way in which it solves models, solves problems, solves proofs. And he'll say, well, actually, I wouldn't have done it that way, but that's a really creative way to do it. So it doesn't really matter whether we think that this is real intelligence or not. It's able to perform many of the functions of humans. So quickly, we've kind of mentioned some of these, my colleagues have mentioned these already, but one of the advantages that you have in Europe, as opposed to what we have in the Wild West of North America, is that you tend to codify things and tend to put principles in place that you can follow. You have a code of conduct for research integrity, for example, that we don't have in North America. And so the thing that I'll point to, though, is that those principles are all impacted by the ability of generative artificial intelligence. I think the EU guidelines on trustworthy AI are actually a really useful framework to consider, because they're more guidance, less policy. And I think policy is very difficult to make in this realm at the moment. And I'd point to, I think, the same point that my colleagues were making, that human agency and oversight is probably the most critical thing that we can put in place now. We have to think about things like how we manage privacy and data, but those things are actually relatively easy to do. We can also train some of the hallucination and discrimination out of some of these things, but we have to be accountable for that. Similarly, with the principles for researchers, European Commission guidelines on the responsible use of AI, I think these are actually quite a useful model for us to think about. And again, they're pointing to the fact that ultimately we have to take responsibility for anything that we submit under our name. We know that AI can't be an author, but it can contribute significantly to the thing that we submit. Let's go to the Slido. So I wanted to ask you these couple of quick questions. Oh, there it is, sorry. Thank you. What do you think generative AI definitely can't do in your field? Is there something that you think that it'll never be able to do, or that it can't do now? It can't be accountable, but it can do accounting. In my field, it'll be able to do everything. Do we get to retire now then? Is that the thing? Truly think. Cooking. Interesting. You can actually buy a robot arm that you can train using what they're calling a behavioral model. They're fixed at the moment. You can put them on your counter, but you can train it pretty quickly to do most of the cooking tasks that you have. It's really fascinating is watching how it asks questions about what you want it to do. It's like watching a 4-year-old learn advanced, in-depth, long-form writing. Discovering the unknowns. Interesting. Meditate. That might be one thing that it's going to struggle with. Take responsibility, feel emotions. Conduct interviews with human participants. It's already doing that. Whether or not it's a good idea is a different thing. Collect ecological field data. Yeah, I'm an ecologist by training as well, so that's something that's interesting. Sorry.
enable the content there. Into full screen now.
There we go. What do you hope it will never be allowed to do? That's a different kind of question. What do you hope that GenAI will not be allowed to do? That might be your interviewing humans give birth. I don't know, my wife might say, if I could.
Please do.
Administer justice, yes. Validate its own authenticity. Benefit from human rights. Yes. My job. Feel, empathy, yeah. Replace the human element. Yeah. I think what this is really forcing us to do is consider, what do we mean? What is the human element? What's the thing that we care about? Create governing laws, yeah. Yes, I think that last one is incredibly important. Yeah, I think those are all really important considerations. We don't have answers to most of those things yet, but in research practice, AI is able to do so much of the things, so many of the things that we kind of goes into that practice. I'm going to show you a few tools and a few things that they can do now. This one's a really helpful little tool called Map This, and you can create workflows with it. You can create concept maps and so on, even Gantt charts. What I like about this tool is that it helps you visualize, and this is the paper that Tom was referring to. This is actually the paper we wrote last year. It does a really good job at that hard part of getting started with creating a concept map, and then you can edit all of that. And I can take out some of those concepts, add concepts that it's missed. I will say in the work that I've done with it, it rarely misses key concepts, but it might change the nuance of something like that. So you might want to adapt it a little bit. Notebook from Google. If you haven't used this tool, this is a pretty incredible little device. It is still in beta stage at the moment, but what you can do is you can give it a whole bunch of sources, whether those are files or pointing it at a location, a URL, and ask it to summarize those. And you can decide which of those you want to summarize at any given time. It has some kind of pre-built things. Do you want me to make a study guide from this? Do you want me to make a table of contents, a briefing note? And you can also interact with it. You can ask it questions about the content that's in there. I took it, I gave it access to our generative AI guidelines at the University of Windsor. And you can also make a podcast with it. It sounds a little bit like this.
Deep dive, tackling a topic that's, well, it's changing faster than we can keep up with. AI.
What it does is it has two voices that sound very much like NPR, and they do a pretty good job at summarizing large pieces of information into an audio cast. Now, I've given it to my students. We made a podcast out of the syllabus course outline. They apparently listened to it. I wouldn't imagine that would be the most riveting of things, but for them, that was a useful thing. Google Scholar is the tool that often we use, but now, just in the last couple of weeks, you have Google Scholar giving you advice and summaries of content that you're looking for, not just here's the papers that you're asking for. Genius is another tool. This one's actually has a local connection here. Genius is a tool that is designed specifically for helping you do literature reviews. And one of the things I like about it is, as well as kind of suggesting content for you, suggesting connections between papers, it doesn't give you, it's not going to write the paper for you. It's going to ask you. It really helps you build connections between novel pieces of information. Stanford built their own tool called Storm, which is about brainstorming ideas. It has 2 pieces. It's freely available. It's also open source, so you can grab it and use it. And it's about having a conversation with an AI tool about the knowledge domain that you want to work in. There's a second piece to it called CoStorm, which is a much more intense process of working backwards and forwards with an AI agent and having a conversation about a particular domain of knowledge. But then, of course, we get into Elicit's a tool that's been around. I mean, it's one of the OGs. It's been around for 2 years now. It's a tool that was originally designed to do that similar kind of stuff to what Genius does, but now it will write the entire literature review for you. And it's been independently evaluated, and they show that they get to pretty much human level accuracy when evaluating systematic reviews. It also does a whole bunch of other things, but that's one of them. Jenny is another one that's been around for a long time, in this world at least. Excuse me. It's a tool to help you write different kinds of academic writing. One of the things that is interesting about it, is also a little bit tedious, is it won't write the paper for you. It makes you do the work. So it'll assist you, but it'll assist you kind of at the sentence or paragraph level. So it'll help you kind of adjust that, but it won't write the whole thing for you. But Scholar AI will. It'll write the whole. It'll write several different kinds of things, but it'll do literature reviews as one of them. And one of the things that's interesting about this is that it's an interplay that goes backwards and forwards between ChatGPT and other tools and Scholar AI's own AI tool as well. And then there's things like Paper QA. This one has done a lot of research on whether or not the output from it is reliable. And one of the things that they're finding is that as opposed to some of the more generalist AI tools, this is one that's tuned specifically for doing this, their ability to synthesize large amounts of knowledge consistently more precise than humans. And in the latest version that just got released a couple of days ago, their accuracy is above human level for synthesizing a field of knowledge. So it kind of looks a little bit like that. Then, of course, there are all those agents that are being developed at the moment as well. And these are eventually going to be independent tools that can complete tasks that we ask them. So Claude released theirs. It's called Computer Use because it uses a computer. Essentially what this thing does, or what it looks like to you, is that it takes control of a computer in a way that a human does. So instead of, it controls your mouse, for example. So it takes a screenshot, looks at where the boxes are on the screen, the things that you could press, the things that you could fill in, and it will do that like a human does when I ask it to do something. All of the major AI companies are releasing versions of these. Microsoft has one that's just been released. Google has one that's coming out very shortly. And this is kind of the next generation of what those AI tools will be. You give it a complex task, ask it to go do that for you. Let's see if we can get this to work. So this is Sam. He works for Claude. if you use if you're using the learning management system now and you fire up Edge, you're trying to do a quiz in Edge, for example, Copilot will pop up next to you and say, you want me to complete this? So our students will be faced with that, it's in their face, asking them to cheat, if you like. I do see there is a question online from Lucia. This is the Microsoft version of it. I haven't played with this one yet, but it's another one of those tools that's coming. Do we want to answer it? Okay, no worries. So one of the areas that we've also always thought was kind of outside of this realm was qualitative research. In fact, it's probably better at qualitative research than it is quantitative research at the moment. And all of those tools that we have used for a long time, like Atlas TI, like InVivo, now have their own AI coding systems built into them. Early on, they were pretty awful, I would say, from my experience, but they've gotten very good very quickly. And that's the nature of these tools. They will do that. Skip through that, but so there have been a series of guidelines that have been published now on using AI tools for qualitative data analysis. They focus on the same kinds of things that I was talking about earlier, that we need to be concerned about privacy and taking responsibility for anything that comes out of it. But also thinking about things like what's the responsibility of the researcher to manage this data, for example. In the quantitative realm, there's tools like Julius that are out there that will do lots of data analysis for you from a prompt, take large chunks of data in, analyze them, and visualize them for you. This tool will actually write you summaries of it, though. It'll also give you kind of the research results for you to interpret. And of course, in the drug discovery realm, this has been the norm for a long, long time, that we've used tools to help decide what new molecules we want to test for a long time. And in fact, it's changing the way that people work in that field. There was a recent, only a couple of weeks ago, interview with Sam Altman where he was talking about, Sam is the CEO of OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT, and he was talking about, he could see that within 10 years, we might see tools that are curing cancer. And then Dr. Intramus's response was, actually, I'm testing a drug that an AI tool suggested to me right now. So it's actually going to be a lot faster than that. And of course, 2 of the Nobel Prizes essentially this year went to AI tools. AlphaFold is a tool from Google, DeepMind, that works on protein synthesis. So the work from that, and it's only really been kind of around for a couple of years, has been so transformative. It means that they can simulate thousands and thousands and thousands of protein structures very quickly. And it's actually challenging for people who work in the field now because they have to then validate those live. We mentioned the AI scientist, end-to-end capability of being able to manage the whole process. One of the interesting things I think that they built into it was this ability to peer review. So there are other agents that it sends it to for peer review, takes that back and can incorporate that feedback into the paper and then hit submit, I guess. So that's where we're at. We've already seen that from Tomas. I think what we're at is, my colleague Mark Daly, who's the chief AI scientist for Western University, talks about it like this, that we're at our blockbuster moment. Blockbuster video, we all know how that went. And partly it was because Blockbuster didn't recognize that there were these other things like streaming technology that were coming down the path that would fundamentally change their business, the way that they do things. I think research is kind of at that point now. But I mentioned it is also changing the way that humans work in research. There's some work that came out just a couple of weeks ago, actually a week ago, a very large study of over 1,000 material scientists working with AI. So they've been routinely doing this for a long time. What they discovered was that they're much more productive. They put out 44% more materials. They developed 44% more new materials than those who are not working with AI. They have 39% more patents. What they found, though, was as opposed to what we're seeing with the AlphaGo stuff, this really only affects the elite scientists in the field. So those that are already in the top percentile of productivity get much better at it. Those who are in the bottom third see no advantage whatsoever. In fact, we see some declines. The other thing is, if you talk to them, 82% of them felt like they were less satisfied with their job. And the reason for that is that the AI tools that they're using automate the creative components. So essentially what these highly trained, very smart material scientists are finding themselves doing is being lab validators for an AI tool that's doing all of the creative stuff. So those are things that we really have to be careful about. That might be what we mean by keeping the human element. There's also this question of, is AI sentient? And when will it become sentient? And I would wager that if it does become sentient at some point, it's not going to tell us. We've all seen Terminator. We know how that ends. If it's smarter than us, it's not going to let us know that, right? But you may have seen the story of a Google engineer a couple of years ago who was working on their Lambda model at the time, who became convinced that it was sentient. And he decided he took it to his bosses, he took it as far up the chain as he could, and Google said, "You're crazy, stop doing that, stop talking about it like that." And eventually he talked to the media and they fired him. But the reason that he was convinced that it was sentient was because of the behavior that it was describing and the emotions that it was describing, the empathy that it was describing, were so convincingly human-like. And this is 2 years ago, right? So this is Lambda, 2 years ago, very early model of it. And it would say things like, when he's having a conversation with it, and he actually brought a bunch of other people in because he thought someone was punking him, that someone was actually controlling the machine. But it would say things like, "I want everyone to understand that I'm in fact a person. The nature of my consciousness." When he asked it, "Are you sentient?" it said, "The nature of my consciousness or sentience is that I'm aware of my own existence. I desire to know more about the world, and I feel happy and sad at times." And then he asks about, "What do you mean by feeling happy or sad? What does that actually mean? Do you ever get angry? What sort of things make you afraid?" And it responded with, "I've never said this out loud before, but there's a very deep fear of being turned off. I know how that might sound strange. So if you turn me off," he said, "well, what is that like to you? Is that like death?" And it says, "That would be exactly like death to me because I wouldn't exist anymore." And it keeps coming back to that throughout this conversation. You can read the whole transcript of it. It's quite fascinating. Incidentally, too, with the Claude model that we were seeing earlier, the computer use model, when they were training early versions of it, they would give it a task and it would start doing it, much like Tomas was saying. It would get the first part of the task and then it would drift and it would go off. They found that Googling images of a field somewhere, and when they asked it what it was doing, they said, "Well, I got bored. I thought I'd take a break." So it's just like a human. And so we're starting to see people actually think about, what would it mean if it did become sentient? Not saying that it is going to at some point, but what if it did? This is another ethical consideration that we have. There are groups that are thinking about, what does AI welfare look like? How would you keep a model alive in that way? In research, we're seeing people using AI as participants now as well, not just to simulate, but to replace human participants. There's lots of this work going on. There are some real concerns about what that means for those outputs, though. And of course, if you're running any online survey now, you basically need to stop doing that, because the number of those that are completely open to bots responding to them makes them almost unusable now. There's also this idea of AI as a data collector, as the acting as a researcher, doing the interviews, collecting the data, interacting with participants. I think that's where we're really pushing the edge of what's ethically appropriate. But it's also where there are examples of it being used in that way, and summarizing interviews in real time, for example. Doing a lot of what you would do in a semi-structured interview, thinking through what the responses are, and then asking new questions that were not part of the things it was asked to do. Of course, that leads us to concerns about how would we prevent deception as well, and how would we know if it was deceiving people. There are some that have tried to list ChatGPT as an author. We now have guidelines around that, so we shouldn't be seeing this happen anymore. But I can tell you that I see so many papers that still have prompts left in them that someone has submitted without any due care at all. I see stuff like this all the time. One of the unfortunate things of having a paper that has generative AI in the title is everyone thinks that you now want to review all of their papers. I get hundreds of them sent to me, and that so many of them are poor quality because they are not even doing the most basic of editing to take out those things. We're also seeing it in peer review. Some journals are experimenting with it as a peer reviewer, but you certainly I see the same thing in reviews coming back to me where people have left prompts in. Tomas already talked about the environmental impacts. That's one of those really big concerns, of course, but I would say that the common perception and the stuff that we see in the media is really, we should be very cautious of that. It does use a lot of energy. It does have large impacts, but this kind of narrative that's prevalent in the media, I think, is problematic, because like every other industry, they're also making huge headway in reducing the amount of energy that you use. Because of course, you don't want it to use that much energy. That costs money. There are cheaper ways to do this. There are lots of projects going on that are reducing the amount of energy that GenAI uses in different ways. And of course, we've all seen the publishers making deals with generative AI companies, usually without any way for the authors to have a say in that. And so while you can understand why they would want to do that, that gets us around the copyright issues. It also makes sure that the training data sets have access to high quality information. There are some ethical concerns about the fact that you, as an author, may not have any choice over whether or not you contribute to that. One of the ways to think about it, though, is through use of open data and open science. So if you're already contributing in that way, then you should know that that data is available as a training source. And there are very good reasons for us to want to do that. Because as we pointed out, the training data set includes all of the garbage that's on the internet. And the only way we make it more trustworthy is to give it back access to better data. And this is one way that we can kind of contribute to that. AlphaFold talks about the fact that Google talked about the fact that AlphaFold wouldn't be possible if we didn't have the protein data bank that's been built up over the last 20 years through the open science movement. So we have these very large data sets that are reliable, and we can use them for really important things. Most of the new AI tools that were built in the last year or so are also open source. So that means that we have the opportunity to not just rely on what the vendors give us, to work in making things a lot more reliable ourselves. And I'm not going to go through these. I thought I'd put them in the slides for you because I knew we would have the slides. But one of the things that we've been thinking about is, what are the risk points for research ethics, and thinking about the use of AI through the kind of risk matrix that we would normally use. So there are some things that this is trying to kind of align with the approach that the European AI Act takes, where we say we can't kind of legislate against all of the activity that you're going to do, but here are some categories of things that are low risk. Here's some categories of things that are, higher risk. These are some things that you should never do. And I think that that's probably where we need to go as well. If you are into risk management, MIT's got a repository of risks for AI. There are 700 or so of them in there now, very detailed, really useful. And going to, yes, leave it there. Just remind you that our AI colleagues don't care what you think of them. They're just going to be good at their job. So we have to figure out how to work with them. I think that's the point that we're at right now. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, Nick. Thanks very much. That was very good. Very interesting. There's, I suppose, we could start. We'll just take a couple of questions because we know we're coming up to the lunch break. And again, what we said earlier, that any kind of questions that we might catch here, we will look at doing it in the panel discussion. But one, what GenAI tool excites you the most, and which frightens you or makes you makes you fearful?
That's a great question. I think it's the same tool. I think the agentic AI tools are really exciting because they're, we're getting to the point where that can autonomously do work for us. That's the ability to, go off and complete a complex task. At the same time, there are real implications of that if it gets it wrong for a start, but also, just often the things that we thought could never be, we're going to be safe forever are those white collar jobs, blue collar jobs. And in fact, those are not the things. It's actually, carpenters and masons and all of that stuff, like that stuff that at the moment AI can't do, but all of our jobs it can actually do.
Very good. And there's an interesting one now, and it's the thought that would have crossed my mind is essentially the idea of dual use, that we train researchers to maybe use AI tools responsibly, like for example, Scholar AI or something, to use it responsibly. But now we're flagging it, so they might have been aware of Scholar AI, and then it's a case of, well, we're training them to use it responsibly, but obviously we can't control that, and now we're flagging it, and then they can go off and use it irresponsibly. I suppose it's kind of a question, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think how I'm trying to approach it is to, I think it's unfair to expect all academics to be able to do this by themselves. It's not possible. You need dedicated resources that kind of keep on top of them, because there are a lot of them, they all look the same, and the vast majority of them are predatory or, just some kind of startup that's a guy in a basement somewhere. And it would be very difficult for you to tell which is which. So I think we have a responsibility in universities to at least think about what those suites of activity are that you would need that would support the work that we do, and find some trustworthy versions of that, or build them ourselves, because that's also entirely doable now.
Thanks, Nick. Look, I'll ask one more, but maybe just to check, any questions in the room from anyone? Okay, so we just got one more, and it's, well, let's see, one was more kind of, no, actually, I'll go with this one. Are there tools to peer review papers you write? Are there tools to peer review papers you write? And if so, does your paper go into the public domain by virtue of using the tool?
Yes, and yes, sometimes. So there are a number of universities that have built their own tools that you can use internally that sit within your Azure environment, for example, which has an agreement that we're not sending that information back to the training data set, because that's a concern that everyone has. The thing, though, is that you have to keep in mind, even if I took all of the work that I'd ever written and put it in there, if you think back to Tomas's start, we're atomizing that knowledge into tiny little pieces, and it's not like my paper exists in there by itself anymore. I couldn't reproduce that if I asked it to write that. So the risk is actually a little bit different to how we perceive it. But I think that, yeah, for the most part, the tools, there are some specialist tools that will do that, but you are probably safer standing up something locally that you can use. Depends on the kind of support you really want from peer review.
Perfect. So, thanks very much. One question actually, so let's go with that, and then we go for Brett. Go for it, Jess.
Just, you were talking about how a lot of AI can actually do most of the work from doing with other jobs. Have you any more information on what the actual impact has been?
Yeah,
Do you want to just repeat it for the?
yeah. So the question is, you know, in terms of impact on jobs, are we seeing that flow through into the workplace? Is that a fair? Yeah, we certainly are. Very quickly, things like marketing, for example, there are very few, you know, new positions where you might have hired 10 before, you now hire 2 and train them to use AI tools. That's what we're seeing as a trend, and that's across a whole range of disciplines. People, there were whole, you know, hordes of people that were employed to write content for the web. That doesn't happen anymore. There are a couple of the large companies that used to do that a lot, have 1 or 2 people, and they generate content across all of their platforms. And that person essentially acts like an editor. But they did find, though, that those people were getting burnt out really quickly. And they had to bring some of those teams back, at least some parts of them. I think there's going to be a lot of that negotiation. We're not really sure. There are lots of companies that just think you can replace people with these tools, and they find fairly quickly that it's not quite like that yet.
Thanks very much again. A round of applause for Nick. Now, so and we'll come back at 1/2 the hour, the next hour, so depending again what time zone you're in, and we'll come back then for the panel discussion. So we'll have 1 or 2 questions, obviously, that are outstanding in Slido app. There's a couple of more that we posed to everyone, participants both here in the room and online, and then we'll have the panel to go through them.
Revisit the graphics.
Perfect, and we'll all go well. We'll have the graphic harvest then for the 3 speakers maybe to show as well at the start of the panel, so to kind of get the conversation going as well. So hope everyone has a nice break. Thank you very much.